Hello, everybody. So welcome to Designer's Guide to Documenting Accessibility and User Interactions. I'm Stéphanie Walter. I'm a UX researcher, but also UX designer in Luxembourg. I'm originally from France. I'm a white woman with glasses, yellow and pink hair, and there's some art and plants in my background. I've been working in the tech industry for more than 12 years now. I've been working for a web agency, for a university, and today I'm a UX consultant from Maltem, as he said. I mostly specialize in mobile design, but also enterprise UX, which means I work a lot on tools that will be used by internal employees within the company. So, quick side note, a lot of sites were designed and even developed without accessibility needs in mind. And as designers, a lot of us think that accessibility is, air quotes, the job of the dev team. So accessibility became kind of an afterthought for a lot of projects. Companies launch inaccessible projects and teams get asked to kind of fix the accessibility issues later. A little bit like this picture of my broken glasses from last year. You could try to put duct tape on top of it, but let's face it, I had to change them. This didn't work. So my question is, why fix it when you could design and build it right to start with? This is why we need to bring accessibility awareness early in the project. When everyone becomes responsible for the accessibility, most issues can be found, identified, and even fixed earlier. And I think that guidelines and documentation can help us achieve that. So the first question you might want to ask is, who should document accessibility? And for me, it's a team effort. So project manager, product manager, they can define an accessibility requirement already at project level. Should we go towards a AA, a AA target? Also, if you work in Agile, those people can add accessibility as part of the definition of done for such environments. Developers and accessibility experts, they document technical implementation like correct markup, Arria roles, landmarks, things like that. Testers, quality assurance teams, the people who are going to technically test your products, they need to also write some test cases, and then they can also write test cases for accessibility, which is how might we actually test this implementation. And then designers. Designers, they design and they document how it works, what it looks like, but also navigation. They can design and document the hidden interaction and what assistive technology should announce. So for now, I will mostly focus on design documentation because this is my kind of area. I'm a designer after all. So how and where should I document things as a designer? For me, the number one advice I can give you today is if you want your documentation to be useful and used, ask your team about what they prefer and what kind of format works best for them. There are many different things you could imagine. I know some people document accessibility directly in the Jira ticket, so they write a specification there. You can document things in Confluence or whatever knowledge base you have. You could use separate documents, like I know some people document things in Word documents, even in Excel sheets or PowerPoint presentation at some time. Figma comments, if you're using this, so Figma is a design tool that is collaborative and you can have comments there. So you could use those as well. For me, it's mostly about what is the best format for your team, not mine. And this has, of course, to be an open discussion. What I can do today is talk a little bit about how we do this so that maybe I can inspire you to come up with your own way. So we use Sketch, which is a design tool, and my developer, they have access to the Sketch mockups directly in the browser. We have a design system file in Sketch, and each component has its own page. So here on the left, you see an example of such a component. It's what is this? It's a filter drop-down list. And you can see a lot of different states and things. So On top of some of those filters, you have some little pink arrows. And this is what the accessibility annotation and more generally like the user interaction guidelines are. So I put design annotation directly on the component mockup to help my dev team understand how this thing should work. I do that mostly in the mockup because I know that a lot of people don't like to read specification and backlog, but they might at some point look at my design file, hopefully, to implement this. So this is kind of the easiest for me and my team. I also created some sketch samples for annotation. So this is what you see in the middle here. It's just a small library of arrows, boxes, number, keystrokes, and stuff like that, so that I can just like drag and drop them in my file, enter whatever text I need, and then I'm done. So I don't need to recreate this all the time. I have those components already ready. And I can also reuse those components in pages. And so I have kind of a second level of annotation sometimes where I will document also some things directly on the whole page. So this is what you have on the left. You have the page without and with annotations. And you might notice that my annotations are magenta pink, like super flashy. The reason for that is that I want to make 100% sure that my dev team knows that the magenta stuff here is the annotation. It's not part of the product because it's completely out of the visual identity of my product. And you might laugh, you might say, yeah, but come on, nobody does that. Like, yeah, no, I saw this happen. I saw some people implement the pink stuff somewhere because it was not kind of clear enough that those were annotations. So be careful. And again, talk to your dev team to make crystal clear that the pink stuff is not to be integrated directly. So while researching for this talk, I stumbled upon Karen Hawkins' accessibility annotation example. And I find her quite interesting as well. So on the left, she has the mockup in the background. And then she has little blue numbers to identify different areas. So those are annotation. And then on the right, she has detailed documentation for each and one of those little blue numbers. She has the generic design annotation in dark, and she put the accessibility requirement in red with a little AR prefix for people who might be colorblind. So there are different styles and the way to document. My advice here is test things and come up with your own, come up with what works best for your team. But remember one thing, this is not a substitute for talking to people. It's still important to present your mockups, to present your designs to the whole team in person or face-to-face or in a Zoom meeting or something. So in my team, what we have is these weekly meetings. The developer will show the demos of what they developed, and then I have some time to show some mockups, to discuss them directly with the developer, to discuss documentation and specification, to discuss also technical feasibility sometimes. So just because I have like super detailed mockups, super detailed annotation, doesn't mean I'm not like presenting those to the developers. So this is still the most important part. So I shared how, I shared where should we document. Let's dig a little bit further with actual examples of what could designers document. While preparing this talk, I tried to organize what designers can document and came up with this graph. I have two axes. Horizontally, on the left, I have things I can document as a designer on my own. And on the far right, I have things I might need the help from developers or accessibility experts to document. And then in the middle, I have like things I can document, but it would still be interesting to have the help of content people, SEO people, web marketing, UX writers. And then I have vertically split this in three areas: component level, page level, and then across different pages. And I categorize those into four things: visual design, interaction, wayfinding, and enhanced content and markup. And I'm going to go through all of them for the rest of the talk, don't worry. This is a very personal way of ordering things. It's based on my own expertise as a designer and my own knowledge of accessibility. But I think building such a map with a team can help, because then you can see who's comfortable documenting what. And it might depend on a lot of factors, especially the level of accessibility expertise of your team. Also, maybe the project might influence as well. If you're building a single page application or a mobile application, you might not have the same map as if you're building a blog, for instance. So let's start with visual design documentation. The first thing designer can document is usually color palette and color contrasts. So here I have an example of how I used to document this. I have two primary colors, then I have my dark grays and light grays. And for each and one of those, I document what will happen if we match that color with a white background. So it's basically, does it pass with AA or AAA constraint for big or regular text? So this is a start, but see, I'm only comparing this to white. Sometimes I need to have kind of more options. So if you need more options, there's interesting color matrix tools that you can use. It's a little bit complicated visually, but I'm going to explain. I have, again, two axes. And on both of those axes, I have all the colors of my visual identity. So here I have my yellow, my purples, and my grays. At the intersection between those, you have the color ratio when they are paired together. So if I want to give you an example, I should not use that yellow as text on a white background, but I can pair it with a darker gray, for instance. So I have to go to the intersection to know if I can pair those two colors together. And you can often put such things in design documentation, because then it will help other designers who might not be that proficient with accessibility constraint understand, okay, can I use those two colors together or not? And one important thing, not all designers might be super familiar with even the concept of ratio. What does 3:1, 4:5 mean? What does AA, AAA mean? And what's a large versus a small text? So here again, what I would advise you to do is to have some documentation for such things. So on the left here, I have a screenshot from a WCAG for designers from Gary. And she is trying to explain like those basics in really simple terms to designers. So my advice is have a place for new designers to find such documentation and explain to them what all those concepts mean. Let's talk about interactions. So for interactive components, let's say buttons or form elements, the first thing I try to document is usually the different states. So here I have a button example. I document default, hover, focus, active, but also disabled state. And I have it in different sizes because it's the design system. For checkboxes, I have default, focus, checked, disabled, checked, undeterminate. When I have plenty of checkbox and someone checks one, then it's kind of, we don't know if you check them all or not, status, and disabled, undeterminate. And for radio button, I have the same, except you can't have undeterminate for those. So this is this kind of thing I'm going to document at component level. For form input, like a text field with label, I will also have those generic classics like default, focus, field, read only, or disabled. So this is the example on the left. But for form fields, when users start to interact with them, I might have some extra statuses, for example, error, success, or information status. So for those, I try to not just use color. I have some text and I have some icons so that the color is not the only way to convey the information. So this is again at component level. But then I'm going to use those things, those generic components inside a page. So it's the example on the right. At page level, where the component is going to use, I'm going to detail this a little bit more. So the question is, okay, when do we trigger the error message? So in this example, I document what triggered the error, what we call the error case, but also what here is the exact message, what's the copy that we should have instead of a message as a placeholder. Then for form, I can also sometimes document the focus order. So it's the order in which user will navigate through the different form element when they use a tabulation key. So here I have an example with a form that is on 2 columns, and I document how the user will navigate through that. So we will start on the top left. We will go through who are you, what is your request about, and your email address, which is the left column. And then you go to the right column to your message. And finally, to the submit button. So I could document this with, again, little annotation with dots and maybe some arrows to show the path. If you're using Figma, the team at Microsoft actually created a nice plugin that is called Accessibility Focus Order. And don't worry, all the links there are in my speaker notes. So this will help you document this directly. So you can select an element. It will attach a little number for the focus order. And then if you change your mind, you can reorder it directly in the plugin. So it's kind of a quick, easy way if you need to document this in Figma. And there are more things you can document for accessibility, but if you're a designer, it might require a little bit more the help of experts like developers or accessibility experts. For example, what is the correct HTML5 type we want to use? So here in my example, I documented again with my really nice ping annotation that we are going to use a native select when we open the component because we don't want to rebuild the browser select. So we'll use select and options. Type equals 8, and for another one, we will use type equals search. You can also document, is this field supposed to have autocomplete, autofill, things like that. Legends and field grouping markup, or if you have form on multiple pages, something like that, you can document the default focus element when this page is going to open. Then for complex components with many interaction, I build what I call interaction flow. So it's documenting how this component should work when there are different types of interaction on it. So I usually start with the most interaction. In this example, I have again my filter with checkbox, and I document step by step what happens when your user opens the filter, they hover an element, what happens when they check a filter, what happens when they hit the apply button. And on top of the mouse interaction, I will also document the keyboard interaction. So I end up with kind of a similar flow, but instead of showing mouse, I have a keyboard navigation. How do we open the component? Here it's enter and space. How do we close it? Escape. How to navigate across the different checkboxes, normally up and down arrows. How to check a box, etc., etc. And if you're building a tool that has keyboard shortcuts, because more and more of our tools are becoming browser tool, like for instance, if you're building Figma, you have a lot of keyboard shortcuts. This could also be a nice place to document those things. Then providing an alternative for complex gesture is an accessibility, but it's also a usability best practice. So an example of a complex gesture could be a swipe right to archive feature in Gmail. So if you're in Gmail and you swipe right, it's going to archive this. It might be complicated to find for users, so you might want to have some alternatives. So if I were to document something like this, I would do that. I would first document the complex gesture. So here I have some little symbols that are showing different touch interactions. And I will put it on the mockup and document the swipe right to archive. And then I can document two alternatives. In Gmail, you can long press something, and then you have this little toolbar that appears at the top, and you can hit the archive button. Or you can open the email detail, and then you can, again, hit the archive button directly. Then, if there are images and icons in the mockups, design can also document what the assistive technology, the screen reader, should announce. In my example here, I have a cooking recipe website with an image of a slice of pizza at the top. I use, again, the annotation technique to document my alternative text for this image. So I got a number 1 on the image, and then I have my alternative description documented on the right side. I also have 3 buttons, a save, a share, and a rate button. And each of those buttons has an icon and a label. For the annotation here, I explain that the screen reader should not announce anything for the icon. Otherwise, it will announce the icon and then the button that might be the same. So it might be a little bit annoying to announce twice the same information. So here, I have no idea how my developer will technically implement the icons. They can do a lot of things. They can use an SVG. They can use an icon font, something like that. So I prefer not to document how these empty things should be. Is it an empty alt text? Is it a role presentation on an SVG or something like that? At this point, I don't know. But I could also discuss with them, and then I could update this documentation to reflect what we discussed for the implementation. Then in the second example, my buttons do not have visible labels. So I have this little tile, and on the right corner, I have two weird buttons. And it's basically to switch this tile from the graph to the table view. So here again, I'm using the annotation technique to say, look, the screen reader should announce something for those. So view graph and view table. And again, here, I could bring that one step further with the help of a dev team. I know that you have some states in Arria, and that you could document those kind of things. So you can also document the announced content order. Most of the time, you want to have the same announced counter as you have in your announced order as you have in your HTML flow, but sometimes it might make sense to change it. No, you want to have the same announced order as you have in the design, but sometimes you want something different. So here I have a medium and a smaller version of my cooking recipe thumbnail component. The medium has a horizontal layout. The image is on the left, and then I have category first, title, summary, and a save button on the right. On mobile, I have a smaller version, but it's fully vertical. I have the image at the top. Then I have the details, the category, the title, the summary, and then the save button is completely at the top right, kind of absolute positioning. So here, in both cases, I actually want the title to be announced first. I don't want the category to be announced first. In my visual design, I chose to have a bigger font for this title. I even switched to a serif font for that. So it means that this, when it comes to hierarchy, this is the most important thing. So here I can document that this should be announced as number one and not number two. Then number two will be the category, the summary, and then I want to announce the save button as last. And even on mobile, I still, even if it's at the top here, because it's basically to kind of have a smaller version of the component to so that it will take less space, I still want this to be announced last. So sometimes the clickable part of an element might also not be super obvious for the dev teams, especially when we wrap a link around the whole component. In this example, I have a tile with a few list items, but each list item has an icon, a title, a number, and an arrow. So here my dev team might ask me, okay, but where do I put the link? Do I put the link on the title? Do I put the link on the little arrow? The answer is you put the link on the whole element. So I can document that in design. I could also put that directly in the Jira ticket, just as a note to say, beware, the link wraps the whole element here. Sometimes screen reader users also might need a little bit of extra information. So if in this example, I have a navigation with some notification badge on some of the items. Just announcing the number might be confusing. So we can document how this should be announced for different scenarios. So if I don't have any new documents, I can announce something like new documents, no new documents, or no new documents in my documents. If now the little notification bar says 5, I could say 5 new documents in my documents, and same for the task. If I don't have any new task, it could be nice to actually announce that there is no new task. So no new task in my task, 5 new tasks in my task, something like that. Those were at component level. There are things I could document also at a higher level, so at page level, starting with HTML title of the page, for example. So the HTML title is what is displayed in the browser tab, but it's also announced by screen readers. So this should help users know where they are and what they can expect of this page. For those, we use Jira tickets. So we have this whole table in Jira where we have HTML page title structure, and then we have an actual example of what it looks like. So for instance, we have my planning, my document, and then we have a lot of operation with numbers and subpages. So for those, we will say operation, then the number, and then what subpages is like overview, contract, counterpart. So I could document this also in the mockups, but here in this case, it was actually easier to have a whole Jira document. Also for consistency, then you can kind of compare to other things in the web app. It's also easier to have everything in Jira here. So proper HTML heading is another important aspect of accessibility, H1, H2, H3. Usually I could do two things. I can use, again, my little annotation to say what level of heading should this be in the mockup. So I have, again, my cooking recipe website. This time it's the mobile version. And gluten-free pizza at the top should be H1. Ingredient is H2. Preparation step should be H2. And then we have each step should be H3. On top of doing that, usually what I do when I design those is I'm creating some styles for all of the headings, and I name my style with the proper level of heading. So this is what you see in the right here. This way, when other designers are going to design new pages, they can reuse the same headings I prepared already. So it's kind of a little bit easier for consistency. I spoke earlier about focus order in forms. Focus order is also something you could document at the whole page level if you start having so super complicated pages that look like SharePoint documentations. Welcome to my world of enterprise UX. Yay. So this is an example I borrowed from a Figma template by, team at Microsoft who work on the Fluent design system, and they provide a whole kit to help you with such annotation. So here again, you have the mockup in the background, and then on top of it, you have small little annotation with the corresponding documentation and their focus order on the whole page, because there's a lot of things you can click through on that complicated SharePoint page. For complex responsive page, you could also document the Zoom behavior. I'll be honest, we mostly work on responsive web design, and we provide a lot of guidelines already for the developers so that it should display properly at different screen sizes and screen resolutions. So I never go into that level of details for websites, but I think it can be quite interesting for native application. So this is an example I borrowed from Goulven Baron at Maif. And it is an FAQ page in the native app, and he documented how the mobile view behaves at 100% and what should happen with those buttons, with those titles, how big should they become once the user zooms this whole native application at 200% zoom level. So those were mostly design documentation, but for many of these examples, you could also collaborate again with your developer team and accessibility experts. And then you can add a lot of more information, things like correct semantic HTML. Is this a link or an href or a button? The good old debate. Arria roles, Arria states and properties, etc. With the help of my accessibility experts, I can also document Arria Landmarks. So Arria Landmarks are areas that help the screen reader users oriented on the page. So here it's a cool example. It's the documentation of Arria Landmark, and you can click on show landmarks, and then they will annotate their own page with the different landmarks that exist. It's kind of a little bit of inception, but it gives you a pretty nice idea of how you could document such things. Designers can also document skip to content links. So usually it's a link that is invisible by default until someone tabs through the page, and then when it gets focused, it is shown. And screen reader it's also announced by the screen readers. And this link lets people skip directly to the content, the main content of the page. So this way they don't have to read the whole navigation over and over again when they want to jump directly to the content. So as designer, I can document where this link is. What does it look like when it's focused? Which is a little bit weird to say, I'm going to design something that no one is going to see until they tap through the page, but still it's something you can document. And also, where will it send the users? Okay, one aspect of design that is quite already tricky to document is animation and transitions. But there are also accessibility best practice as well for those. Some animation and transition might trigger motion sickness to some users, and I'm sadly one of those users. And to avoid that, you can use something that is called prefers reduced motion media query. I'm sorry, I'm going to play a video now. It might be a little bit triggering because things are going to move on my screen. So you might want to look away if you might be prone to motion sickness. So by default on my blog, I have some little things floating around my head, which can be a little bit triggering. I have these 3 elements. And when you scroll down the page, I need a really fun, cool animation of a plant that is growing. But this might be an issue for some people. So I use the prefer reduce motion media query. And then I can tick the accessibility option in my Mac. And I completely removed the little thing moving around my face. And then the plant growing animation that might be triggering, I replaced it by a simple fading, which is usually less triggering than things moving around on the screen. And the complicated part with that is how can we document things that move, basically? And it's already super tricky to document animation to start with. So animation is often something that we build directly in the browser in collaboration with the dev team. So I would say this is where you really want to start kind of having a discussion with them, and maybe documentation will be more like describing how the animation should react or should play on different areas, what happens with and without prefers reduced motion media query. And also, if you're designing things that have states like videos and sliders, you might want to design a play pause button so that your users are in control and they can basically pause anything that is moving around on their screen. If we go like one step higher in my graphs at the beginning, I was talking about things that you might want to document across pages. So this is why I usually document user flow and screen flow. So user flow on the left are kind of these step-by-step box and arrow graphs that document how someone will accomplish a task. I list pages, view, branching, and this is usually built at the beginning of the project, and it actually helps me build the pages because now I have a full map of how those pages are going to interact with each other. Screen flow on the right are kind of the same, but instead of having these abstract little boxes, I'm going to put the actual mockups. And then I'm going to, again, draw those links to help developers understand how do we go from one page, or in this case, one mobile view to the other. I found out that developers love this kind of stuff because they have a super clear map of what's going on. Also, my tester loves it because I've basically written half of the test cases here for him. So we are really good friends. And such things like that can help you document accessibility as well. So if you're going to plan a transition like animation between pages, often you do that on mobile native application, like it's moving from left to right, stuff like that. This helps you plan this kind of stuff. Alert messages. Sometimes you do something on a page, you arrive on another page, but you still need to keep the alert messages at the top. This is things you need to plan as well. Or a multiple step flow, like booking system with a card, like give us your email address, give us your payment method, and then confirmation, stuff like that. Finally, there are things you can't really document in design files. And for those, I often provide links to external sources. Such examples are captions for videos. You can provide a link to the plain text transcript, to the caption file. If you're doing podcasts, you can provide a link to the text version of your podcast. And usually when you work with SEO people or UX writer, they love to build those Excel sheets of call to actions, so button links. Because the worst thing that you can do for SEO, but also for accessibility, is those horrible click here link. It's really bad for both. So usually when you work with content people, they will often already provide you like clear link structure, things like that. So this is the kind of external document that you might want to link at some point. So I gave you plenty of examples of what to document. The final question now is, okay, but what are the benefits of such documentation? Why should we care about that? And also, how do I convince my team to invest in design documentation? Well, a few reasons. The first benefit of documenting accessibility is actually for me as a designer. I learned so much about accessibility by documenting this kind of stuff. To document such thing, you need to actually understand the thing. You need to read, you need to ask questions to experts, you need to reach out to people. So documenting this kind of thing helps me grow and keep up to date as a designer and understand better how I can make my website better for people with accessibility needs. It forces me also to think about different interaction beyond this kind of static pixel mockup I'm working on. Like documenting is a nice mental effort that forces you to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, how will someone actually interact with those pixels, with the mouse, with the keyboard? How will it work on touch screen? What will a screen reader announce, etc., etc. So sometimes I'm so deep into the pixel detail that I might have designed something that is not working once you start thinking about the interaction. So actually taking the step and like really the step like those interaction flow step to document this sometimes forces me to rethink a solution that was not going to work anyway. It benefits my designer developer. I should have added tester relationship here. Design documentation helps avoid some common misinterpretations with my team. And of course, it doesn't mean that just because you've documented something, you don't need to talk to your developers. You still need to present those mockups and you still need to communicate. But sometimes they might be months between the moment I shoot those designs within this weekly meeting, presenting it to them, and the moment that Jira ticket actually arrives in their backlog. And having a good documentation is able, lets us kind of reset this conversation. They will remember what we talked about. And sometimes even I didn't remember why I decided to do some stuff. So I'm really happy that I have documented the reason why this exists and how it works. Because yeah, as I said, if the devs ask me a question or something I designed 6 months ago, I might not remember everything. It also helps bring consistency to future pages and interactions. If interaction and accessibility are documented for one component, then similar components should kind of work the same way. My dev hold me accountable on that. Like really, sometimes they will come to me and say, Stephanie, this is almost the same component as this one. Why is this working differently? It's like, because you're right. I'm going to bring consistency because you're totally right. Those two things should work the same way. And it also benefits my fellow designers. It's a good onboarding tool, I think, for new members in the team, especially if they don't know anything about accessibility. They get example of what is expected from them. Often they will also ask a lot of questions. They will learn about accessibility in the process, like I learn about accessibility while documenting those things. And it's kind of part of being into a team as well. Prior documentation helps set standards as to what is expected for kind of the next design. We want that level of quality, you know. And then again, this helps bring consistency. When the design team grows, we have example of how we should do things. And it also helps not forget about accessibility if you have to actually document it. And then it benefits everyone in the team. So it usually starts a conversation about accessibility within the company and encourages people to dig a little bit further. And this kind of documentation, they help make sure that accessibility is not an afterthought anymore, but part of the project at each and different stages. So I shared with you a lot of things you can document as a designer to help push accessibility a little bit forward. The goal is to give you some examples, some inspiration. But I will be honest, I don't have time to document all of that on all of my design mockups all of the time on all projects. The goal, I would say, is to pick battles. And if your time is limited, document the thing that where there might be kind of big issues and big misunderstanding. The important thing here is that it's a teamwork. So even if you don't document everything, like in the mockups, have a conversation with the dev team. Communication is important here. Also with other designers and with the testers, so that we, at the end of the day, can bring more accessible product to the market and to our users together. And make sure that it's, again, part of the project from the beginning. And yes, it's a long, demanding job, but trust me, it's worth it. Thank you for your attention. And the last 2 slides is just a lot of resources. So I found 3 different library you can use if you want to document accessibility. 2 of those are for Figma, and the third one is for Figma Sketch and Adobe XD. And then I have a whole bunch of links. So everything I showed in the slides, the matrix and all of that, this is all in the speaker note. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it. We've got a ton of questions already coming in for you. So I'm going to start with some of the most popular. So I think the most popular question in here is, where do you draw the line between this is so standard, the engineer should know how to build this accessibly, versus speccing out every little detail?
I don't assume anything is standard those days. Honestly, it's like at some point I've worked with enough engineering to know that just because someone knows something doesn't mean all the other ones. So I would say it's, again, I'm going to say a lot, but it's a teamwork. So it's mostly communication with them. And so I don't think you can over document, but I think it takes a lot of time to document things. So I would say this is why maybe this matrix I showed at the beginning might be interesting, because then designers know what they can document on their own, but also maybe you could do something like that for the dev team as well. And also it's a field that is moving a lot. Like I see a lot of discussion, and even accessibility experts don't always agree on some topics. So I would say you don't really draw the line. You try to understand what your team is capable and comfortable with, and then you kind of decide together. It's like I've done a lot of back and forth, and I've done a lot of mistakes. And this is also why when you're in Agile, you have retros, for instance. So at the beginning, I admit that in some area where I worked, I was a little bit mad at the developers. Like, come on, you have an inspect tool. You just have to click and copy paste the color. It's like, why is the color not the right one? So you can be mad, or you can maybe ask them, and then you can understand that, oh gosh, yeah, they were in a rush. They thought it was another color that was already used. So yeah, it usually comes down assuming the people you work with mean well, do their best, and then when there's issues and misunderstanding, just like communicate with them. Most of the people are, at the end of the day, they want to do a good job. So.
That's a very nice way of putting it. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay. I think you may have started to answer some of this question towards the end when you were referencing some resources. Do you have a checklist that you follow to help you consider all the aspects of accessibility and not forget?
No, but I should. No, we have a checklist for Jira tickets, which is so that we don't forget a lot of things about interactions. But yeah, usually the checklist is in my head, but no, you're right. I should at some point maybe add that to the project. True. Okay. Another thing to document, a checklist.
Right. Okay, here's another one. What do your files and or page structures look like within all of these annotations? Do you have a dedicated page to keep the UI UX specs clean?
So we have two things. We have the design system, which is one sketch file. And in this, each component has its own file, its own artboard, sorry. It's super detailed. And then we have the pages. So the pages are in a second sketch file. So the design system is used as a library so that whenever we update a component, then it's reflected on the pages. But yeah, often when I document a lot of things, I will have, maybe I can go back to the slide here. So I will often have the page, the clean version, especially if I'm doing usability test on that. I don't want to have the annotations. So I have the clean version, and then I will have a second version of that page. So here the names are messed up. Usually I have an X somewhere in the number so that it will be at the end of the page listings. But yeah, I keep those two. And then as I showed you, this is basically a real project with a real Completely. That's a filter checkbox list. Yeah, so that's our filter, and you see it's like at the beginning it's just a button and you click on it, you know. So you need to document everything that is happening once you click on this button and how it's going to filter. We use it in the search and the tables. So yeah, one component is actually detailed like that, like a lot of different details. And when it's a complex component, so here we have, it's basically two components. It's a button component plus the checkbox list. Then the buttons, they have, again, their own documentation. So yeah, I think the design system is almost a bigger sketch file now than the pages, because we have all of those components.
A lot of folks in chat are also appreciating the magenta annotation style. I think many other folks are using that too. Okay, I think we've got time for one more. How do you document changes and decisions made through design iterations?
We don't. We have Jira tickets. So we have the example at the moment. I think I have 3 versions now of one of those components. And usually what I do is when we change a component, I will keep it in the third file for archive and safekeeping. But most of the time you have the component in the Jira ticket. So now if I wonder what was the component, what did the component look like 2 months ago or something like that, I will go back to the Jira ticket and I have a screenshot of the document there. So, but I work in an kind of a high security environment. So I'm already super happy that I can share the sketch links, because before that I was not even able to sketch links were sketch.cloud, and anything that has cloud in the URL gets nuked by the proxy. So sketch changed their URL, which is really good. So now I, as a designer, can go back in the sketch file. You know, you have the history in the sketch file, so you can actually look at a previous version. So I can check that. But yeah, then more on the project level, it's more like Jira tickets is kind of the single source of truth. I don't know if this answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Stephanie, thanks so much for your time. The volume of chat here is very significant. Tons of unanswered questions. Thank you all for staying so active.
Send it to me, and yeah, I will try to. I can answer them on Twitter. Cool.
Sorry, go ahead,
and yeah, the article is already online if you want the resources. And yeah, if you want, you can send me the question, and I can try to answer them on Twitter maybe, or at the end of the article, but will take a little bit more time.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye-bye.